Hello and welcome to a very big weekly MTG because we're circling back after the holidays, as everyone does. But we said some stuff before the holidays about Commander. We're going to say some more stuff today about Commander. And to do most of that saying is our good friend Gavin Gray. Welcome, Gavin.
Hey, so glad to be here and so glad to be kind of talking about this. Me and the whole Commander format panel are really excited about what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so for anyone who's not initiated, let's take one little jump back in our time machine to before the holidays and tell us kind of why we're here, what we're doing, that whole deal.
Right, so we formed the Commander format panel late last year. It's got me kind of as the Wizards liaison and then a bunch of folks from all around the Commander community, from all walks of it, from super casual Commander players all the way up to some EDH experts. And one of the things we talked about at the end of last year was trying to work on Commander matchmaking, right? A Commander matchmaking system. And we showed off a very early version of it at that time. But that was also a long time ago, right? And if you saw a Magic set many months before it came out, or before we handed off design, it would also look a little rough around the edges. So we've done a lot of iteration and work on it. And frankly, the format panel has done an amazing job. I had some initial ideas, the design team had some initial ideas, but they've done an amazing job taking this and really iterating on it over and over and over and poking holes in things and finding the best solutions to things. And I'm really proud of what they've come up with. So this is far better than anything we showed off last year, and I am stoked to get to show it to you all today.
So that's what we're going to spend the entire show on. I do want to say right at the top, no bans or unbans today. That's not what we're doing today. We're going to revisit that in the future. We're going to circle back again at a later date. Today we are talking about this Commander bracket system that you all have been working on. So why don't you start kind of with real top line, what is this, what are your goals?
Yeah, totally. So kind of three things I want us to kick off with. The first thing, and one that I want to make really clear to everybody, is for many of you out there, you'll hear about this, and nothing about how you play Commander will change at all. Right? This is a way to help matchmake. So if your play group is playing games and they're great, if you're having fun, if everything's good at home or at your local game store, you're all good, right? You don't need to interact with this at all. But as Commander has grown and grown and grown, and you now go to game stores all the time where maybe you haven't been to, or players come in that haven't been there before, or you go to a big convention like a MagicCon and try and find Commander matches, that kind of matchmaking becomes harder, right? Yeah. When you have almost every card in all of Magic at your disposal. And so one of the things we really wanted to do was create a more common language, give you some extra terminology that you can use to help find the games that you want to find. So if you want to use it, it's awesome and it's there, and I think it's going to be really helpful for finding those matches. But if your play group knows what you like, that's wonderful. You don't have to interact with this in any capacity.
Yeah. Okay, so that's sort of the goal, the big picture. Tell us give us the overview of how the system works, big picture.
Yeah, I guess two quick things I'll say before we get into the rest of it. The first thing I'll just say is we can't stop people from lying to you. So if someone sits down with a deck...
if we could.
Yeah, so if someone sits down with a deck that doesn't follow the system rules, I know a lot of people want it to be perfect and to make sure that doesn't happen, but can't stop that from happening. But our goal is to have two folks that want to play a good game together, play a good game. And the third is we're calling this Commander Brackets Beta. That's what we're rolling out today. And I really want to emphasize, before we go into the rest of it, this is the beta version of it. We want to take your feedback in and make it even better, right? Just the way that the Commander format panel took my and the design team's original idea and iterated on it to make it even stronger. All of your notes are going to be really helpful during this process. So we really welcome your feedback, whether it's in the chat here on stream, whether it is in the official Magic the Gathering Discord, whether it is on social media, or at MagicCon Chicago.
Well, and that's a good point because that's one of the reasons we wanted to get this out now was Chicago is in some ways a really big beta test for this system. And so, yeah, so there's an official Magic Discord to check out, social media. We'll be watching chat and throwing notes out there.
And at Chicago, we'll have a small part of the command zone really dedicated as a testing spot for us.
Awesome.
Of course, you can do it anywhere you want to in the show floor. We're not going to stop you. But we're going to have format panel members, Wizard staff over there checking it out, seeing what's going on, and just kind of getting some feedback on it. So we really welcome your thoughts on this, for sure.
Yeah. All right.
All right, now it's time.
Okay. Well, without further ado, we keep saying it. Let's show the it. So let's start talking about the brackets. So we've got some great graphics that we're going to put up on the screen. Start us at the beginning here.
Right, so there are 5 Commander brackets, 1 through 5, and I'll kind of walk through all of them. The first bracket is the, I'd say the most the most casual of them, and fifth bracket is the most competitive of them. So we'll start with bracket number 1, which is Exhibition. Exhibition is a level for your ultra casual commander deck. This is something even below the power level of a precon. This is something that might be your really thematic deck. Maybe it's your Weatherlight Crew theme deck, your villains yelling in the art deck, your I put every soldier in here deck. There's a lot of stuff that could fit into this category, but something that is, you're sitting down, the game's gonna go long, you're there to kick back and relax, and it's more about just the experience of playing with your friends than anything else, and showing off the cool thing that you've created. Now you'll notice a couple things down there at the bottom. There's kind of 4 main talking points that a lot of people use when figuring out what kind of commander game they want to play, and that's mass land denial, extra turns, 2-card infinite or lockout combos, and tutors. And so we kind of wanted to create some definition for each of these 4 things for each of the brackets.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about game changers pretty in depth, but it would be good as we go through this for you to give some examples of each of these. So we say, for example, no mass land denial or extra turns. What do you mean by mass land denial?
Yeah, so mass land denial, and there'll be an article coming out with all this information after this stream. But mass land denial is, we framed as anything that will regularly destroy, exile, bounce 4 or more lands per player, or keep 4 more lands per player tapped. So cards like Armageddon, Winter Orb, Sunder, or it makes them not produce mana of their type. So Blood Moon, all that stuff.
Sure.
Cards that basically a lot of people have soft banned from their commander tables anyway, but aren't actually written and codified anywhere, we wanted to put on here, right? Because I've heard the story so many times of someone starts playing Commander, and they look at the Commander ban list, and they're like, oh, well, it looks like Armageddon and Blood Moon are great to play. Let's go right in my deck. And they sit down at a table, they cast Armageddon, and everyone's like, what the heck? You're not supposed to Armageddon people. So having that actually on a list somewhere codified is really nice. Extra turn spells, a lot more straightforward. These are cards that take extra turns. Infinite or lockout combos, once again, those are very much you will know it when you see it kind of situation. Game changers, we'll get to in a little bit. I want to get through all 5 of the brackets, then we'll describe what game changers are. This is a list of cards. We'll talk about that at the end. And then finally, tutors, right? A little bit of tutoring, great. Finding 1 card here and there, cool. Inefficient tutors like Diabolic Tutor, awesome. But when you start finding the same cards over and over, it makes the games a little more homogenous, and that's what we want to try and get away from at the lower levels. We really framed brackets 1, 2, and 3 as more socially focused, and bracket 4 and 5 as a little more, I don't want to say competition focused, but like it's more about smashing your opponents.
It's more about winning. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the difference between 1 and 2.
Right, so bracket 2, we really frame this as the average pre-constructed deck. So if you think of the average pre-constructed deck today, that's bracket number 2. Now there are some outliers here. Modern Horizons commander decks, Secret Lair commander decks maybe are a little outlier. But if you think of your average pre-con deck, this is about where that sits. So of course, your deck's aiming to win. You're gonna have powerful engines and stuff, but you're not gonna have mass land denial. You're not gonna be chaining extra turns over and over again. Maybe you take 1 turn.
Let's pause there. So what's the difference between taking extra turns and chaining extra turns?
Yeah, so this was a big thing to talk about. Chaining extra turns is like 1 extra turn. Oh, that's fine. That's good.
Sure.
That can be fun. But when you start taking 2, 3, 4, 5 extra turns in a row, that feels like a combo deck almost, right? And everyone is sitting there watching you play your deck, which is not always the most enjoyable.
So like a Stitch in Time in your coin flip deck, it's on theme.
Yeah, the clause is really there for me so I can keep playing Stitch in Time.
Right, exactly.
That's the actual thing going on here. No 2-card infinites, no game changers. Once again, we'll get to that in a little bit. And then still low on the tutor density, for sure. Okay, now let's go to the third one, I think. This will be, I'll have some stuff to talk about here. So this is upgraded. Upgraded is, well, makes sense. Core is a precon level, and Exhibition is kind of below a precon level. 3 is above a precon level, so it is upgraded. It's above the strength of an average precon deck. Your decks get a lot stronger here. There's still no mass land denial. Like I said, we want to keep that out of the first 3 brackets. And you're still not chaining extra turns, because that's very much like this kind of combo-y finish. But 2-card infinite combos in the late game, we're not talking Thassa's Oracle on turn 3 or whatever. But if the game ends on turn 7 or 8 with an infinite combo, that's acceptable, or a lockout combo. And at this level, you can start playing up to 3 game changers.
Yeah, again, the game changers are very important to this. That's why we're talking about them separately. Right. So hold your thoughts on those for a little bit. I see some people talking about this in chat. Game changers are a very important piece of this. So we'll get to that.
And we're really excited about what the game changers list is. I think it's a really cool tool for us. We'll get to that after all 5. So hold on, just 2 more brackets, and you'll see them.
The other thing I want to say about 3, so I did the exercise yesterday of just going through my commander decks and like seeing where they fell. the vast majority of them, not building towards it, not intentionally doing it, kind of fell in 3. And I think that's going to be a fairly common experience.
Yeah, we expect most decks to fall in 2 and 3, and then 4 after that. But we really want to try and, well, let's talk about 4 actually. I'll talk about 4, then I'll explain kind of how it all comes together. Let's go to 4. So 4 is optimized. This is high-powered commander. You get to go wild. This is basically all the restrictions are off. You want to blow up lands? Great.
Yep.
You want to go for infinite combos? Great. You want to play as many game changers as you want? That's great. The ban list, of course, still applies. But this is high-powered commander. This is you've taken the commander you want to build, and you have built the best version of that you possibly can within the restrictions. The difference, though, the key here is this about taking the commander that you want and building it in the best way you can. But it's not about optimizing for a metagame or optimizing for any kind of tournament structure or anything like that. And that's where let's put it on the screen, bracket number 5. We're just calling it CEDH, right? So CEDH is also very high power, but there is a very relevant difference between 4 and 5, right? 5 is optimizing for a tournament play, for a metagame, thinking there's a lot of things that go along with CEDH play, like tableside manner, no spite plays, that kind of thing. And we wanted to really quantify that. I was really glad we had some CDH folks on the panel, because one thing they really tried to talk about a lot, and I really appreciated, was how there is a sizable difference between CDH and high power.
Yeah.
And also when talking about matchmaking in Magic, CEDH is the one that has worked in Commander, right? When I say CEDH, everyone kind of knows what that is, and it's done a good job of this already.
Yeah.
So handing that as the 5th bracket made a lot of sense to us. So to kind of go back to what we were saying a second ago, I think a lot of decks will fall into 2, 3, and 4. That's where a lot of folks' decks will hit. And then CDH is a smaller subsection, but that's a very dedicated group. And 1, there is definitely a group of folks that want to play at a lower power level than a precon. I've heard this from a number of people. And I also think it's really great to have an area where those can exist. I'm a great example of this. I've never built a silly deck not focused on winning in my entire life. It's just not the person I am. But now that I know that there is a bracket I can play that in, I kind of want to go build one so I know I have a place to play it, right? And I'll build my kind of goofy deck where we all get to show off like a fun theme and enjoy the time together. So it creates a space for that.
Yeah, and I love, anytime I go to a Magic Con, I always run into or play against people who have an aesthetic theme too. Ladies looking left, or my deck is all misprints, or I have a retro frame deck. It's fine. And I think that having that as a spot on its own is great, because then it's just like 4 people hanging out showing off their cool stuff.
Right, which is awesome, as opposed to what we want to avoid, which is, I'm going to show off my cool back on Blackblade white border commander deck, and you're like, great, blow up all your lands. And you're like, well, it's not really what I was here to do.
It was a white bordered Armageddon, like it's fine.
So that's kind of how this is all set up, but I think we should, of course, talk about the Game Changers list, shouldn't we?
We absolutely should. So the Game Changers list is... It's I think the thing that people are going to talk about most in this. The land and destruction, tutors, all of that stuff kind of makes sense. People sort of separate themselves in that form and fashion anyway. But I think the Game Changers list is the secret sauce here. So tell us about that.
Yeah, let me give a little bit of preamble before we bring it up on screen. So the Game Changers list is something new. We're really excited about this. It is a single list of cards. So unlike maybe the previous brackets as we had talked about, it's not a bunch of things you have to track. It's one list of cards. In this initial beta, it's 40 cards that are on this list, although a lot of them are in very similar categories, as you'll see here in a second. The idea is it's part watch list. So it's part like, hey, these are some cards that you should know. These are really powerful Magic cards that we certainly have our eyes on. And if we do, in the future, end up banning any cards, it'll almost certainly be off this list, which is really nice. No matter how you feel about how Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt not being legal, I think one thing everybody kind of agrees on is the surprise of it was it was a big surprise to the whole community. And so having a list of like, hey, just so you know, these are some cards we have our eyes on is really meaningful. Now, it's not saying that these cards are all at risk, but just knowing that they're there, and they'll be signaling and things like that in the future, but knowing that they're there, that they are cards that we have our eyes on, I think is really important.
A card won't jump from not on this list to banned. It would go through this list first.
Almost always, yeah. Maybe in a very rare situation like Nadu, where it's a brand new card and I just want to hurl it into the sun.
Sure.
Like all copies of Nadu should be. I would be I'm not a fan of that card. I would be that might be one case, but in general, it'll go from this list. And similarly, it gives us a great half step down. If we pull cards off the ban list, they can move on to the game changers list, where they can impact the people who want to play at the higher powers of Commander without impacting the folks that want to play at the lower brackets of Commander. So you can imagine a number of cards that are currently on the ban list that could potentially come off and go on here. I'll give one example, because I think it is maybe the safest one to give, is Coalition Victory, right? Coalition Victory is a card that maybe at a weak Commander pod, it's kind of frustrating, the game ends out of nowhere, but if you're playing at a Optimize or CEDH level, Coalition Victory is not going to cause too much of a problem, right? So you can imagine a number of cards could come down, and it creates this kind of half step, this little step between it. It's kind of like one of your favorite formats, Canadian Highlander, where you have a little.
I didn't even get to make the first.
I know. I got it in for you.
I had one queued up for later too.
Where you have you've got an extra way you can adjust kind of how cards show up.
Yep. Exactly.
So we're pretty excited about this. It's like part watch list, like I said, and part like, hey, planting flags in the ground. These are cards that mean business. If you put them in your deck, know that not everyone wants to opt into this kind of gameplay. They are really powerful Magic cards.
Yep.
So I think we should probably
just put the list up.
So here's the list. And you'll see this is 40 cards. You'll see there's a lot of things in kind of similar categories. There's a number of the strongest tutors go on here.
Yep.
They tend to homogenize games, make games very similar. There's some fast mana that's on here. You've got Crow Mox, Grim Monolith, Ancient Tomb, stuff along those lines. You've got just some general like lockout, Staxy style stuff on here as well. Drannith Magistrate, etc. And then we very carefully chose a handful of commanders for this list. In general, commanders are the thing that it's most easy to opt out of, right? If someone flips up their commander, you can say, hey, I don't want to play against that. And we really tried to keep it to ones that if someone flips it over, you just kind of know that they're there to do something strong, right? If someone shows you their Grand Arbiter Augustin IV commander deck, you're not like, oh, it's the nice, fair Grand Arbiter Augustin IV commander deck. We're going to have a fun time. It's like, no one's really doing that. So this is the list that we've come up with. We did a lot of talking, a lot of iterating. There are so many cards we discussed going on here. But one thing that was important to us is to keep it relatively small and approachable. 40 was kind of where we wanted to start with this initial beta test. Of course, your feedback is going to be critical here, right? I'm sure that there are some cards we'll end up pulling off, some cards that we will end up putting on, and hearing from all of you is going to be really important during this iteration cycle.
Well, and I imagine, and chat's already doing it, that specific cards are going to be a lot of what people talk about. Why isn't this card on it? Why is this card on it when this card's not? And there's going to be a lot of that conversation. So is that, are you all tracking that? How are you handling the individual card conversation?
Yeah, please let us know. Social media, the official Magic Discord, we're going to have people in there routing all that to us, telling us in person, going to MagicCon Chicago. All that stuff is great. I have a very strong feeling that there will be no shortage of content made about this whole thing. So I look forward to watching and listening to all of it. I will say that there's an article that'll go up as soon as this stream is finished that has a very long FAQ section. It's like, it's like, oh, why'd you guys do this? Why'd you guys do this? And I have a breakdown of why every card is on this list. So you can look forward to that in the article that'll go up in under an hour or so.
Now, I do have a question that I think is a good one for the audience. So, the brackets specifically call out tutors and being careful. So why keep tutors on this list? So Demonic Tutor, Imperial Seal, Vampiric Tutor, you're calling those ones out specifically.
They're really best-in-class tutors, and especially the ones that are super cheap and can find anything, like Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Imperial Seal. They really tend to homogenize games, and I mean, you could kind of always justify playing them in any situation. So we really wanted to limit them to level 3 and higher, and kind of keep the tutors that are showed up at the brackets 1 and 2, things more like Fabricate, Diabolic Tutor, maybe something really narrow like Steel Shaper's Gift for those decks. But that's the thing we're happy to iterate on, right? If the community's like, hey, can you just make tutors, if you take them off this list and just keep them in their own category, I can still play Demonic Tutor at the first and second bracket. That's the thing we're totally open to hearing, right? So once again, your feedback is going to be critical here, right? We put a lot of time and energy into working on this, and we are really excited about it, and we've tweaked our decks and looked through everything and worked on this process. But we know it's not perfect at the same time, and we are really happy to take in feedback and iterate on it further.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I did this exercise with most of my decks yesterday just to get a feel for it, to talk about it today. And I think my favorite part of this was it provides incentive not to play some of these cards. Whereas previously you'd been like, well, in black, I might as well play Demonic Tutor. Or I'm in blue, I might as well play Rhystic Study. And I'm looking at some of my lists and I'm like, this deck really isn't a 4 all I have to do is remove Ristic Study, and it's a 3. Okay, great, and I can put in a more relevant card to the archetype or what I'm trying to do. And I really liked having reasons not to play these cards, because before there really wasn't that pressure.
Right, there's like a kind of this race, right, where someone's like, well, okay, my friend has Ristic Study in their deck, or well, everyone puts Ristic Study in their deck. I guess I also better put Ristic Study in my deck.
Yeah.
And instead, what if neither of you had it, and you got to play some other card in its place? And if you like Ristic Study and you want to play with it, there's a place for you to go play and hang out. And if you don't want to deal with that card, you can just go and you can play in the second bracket, and that's a really safe place, right? And as always, we should say, Rule 0, pregame discussions, all that stuff is still great and applies, right? So if you sit down at your table, and you have a bracket 2 deck, and there's one game changer on there, it's a great conversation to have. I'm sure I'd probably be like, yeah, that's fine. Similarly, if, whatever you want to do with your Rule 0 conversations, like all that is still something that is totally reasonable to do.
It's a starting point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to talk about this list that's really important to me is there's a lot of awesome community tools out there that people use for building decks and looking for cards. And we really wanted to make sure that, given that Commander is a community format, a lot of people use these tools, that all of that was connected to this announcement. So we worked with Scryfall and Moxfield and Architect and the folks at EDH Rec. And they have some updates that basically as soon as this is finished, will go live. So if you're searching in Scryfall, you can find all the game changers. If you're building your deck in Architect or Moxfield, there'll be some tags of how you can bracketize them. So I really wanted to loop the whole community in on this and make sure that from the get-go, you're able to try this out and all the tools you need are available for you.
So in just a moment, we are going to do a Q&A. You'll be able to ask Gavin all kinds of questions. It's going to be easiest for me to find stuff because there's 5,000 of you in chat. If you tag @Magic, and I will try to grab questions as I can, and we're just going to spend the whole time answering questions. I did want to make one other point from a comment I saw in chat about, oh, well, this just means I'm going to put more staples in my deck. And I think that that's actually, that was one of the deck building things I found too, was I had like high-powered decks that I thought of as very strong decks, and it was like, oh, there's only 2 game changers in here. I want to play this at level 4. I might as well put some of these other cards in there. And it turned into this thing where I was taking cards out of decks I wanted game changers out of and then putting them into decks and just like rebalancing my decks. I actually really liked that dynamic.
Right, and hopefully it helps us equalize, once again, like equalize what you're playing at each level, right? And one of the biggest things here too is I'm sure there'll be some amount of consternation over like, ooh, is this deck more of a 3 or a 4? Like, where am I at? And one of the big things for us is we know that it's going to be a little imperfect, but it's a guiding light. And if 3 play against, I guess put another way, we found you can play 1 away from you pretty safely, right? So if you build a 3 and you play against a 2 or you play against a 4, it's not the end of the world. It's probably going to be okay in a lot of instances. 4 players in a game, you can use politics, etc. But what we especially want to avoid are like the 1s and 2s playing against people who are like a 4, for example, right? Because that's when you get that game where you're playing a precon and someone goes, turn 1, Ancient Tomb, Mox Diamond, Ristic Study, go. And you're like, that's really not what I signed up for here, right? Or the Armageddon you or what have you. So just creating a little bit of guidance around that we thought was really valuable. One thing while the questions are rolling in too, I just want to call out is, so our goal, our target for this is to take all your feedback in over the next several weeks and then come back late April with the more final rollout of the system. And at that point is when we will unban any cards along with it so that we can move them onto the game changers list at that time. So if you're really hanging around waiting to hear if there's any unbans or anything like that, late April is the time I would circle on your calendar for that occurring. And we will still be, as we said originally, we will not be banning any cards at that time. We will only be potentially unbanning cards. So.
All right, one last thing before we get to questions. Ben Wheeler, who I know is on the committee, when he talks about Canadian Highlander, this was going to be my reference. He talks about how it's always more interesting to build a deck when you have to make choices. And I think that's one of the great things the Game Changers list does, is it forces you to look at those Game Changer cards where originally you would have been like, yeah, it's a Ristic Study, of course I'm going to put it in there. And now you have to think about it. Do I want to put it in there? Does it make sense for this deck? Does it push it into this bracket or that bracket? Which bracket do I want it to be in? I think it makes deck building really intentional, which is, again, a thing I really like about it.
Yeah, I think the intentionality is really great. Like it's this thing you might not have even thought about before, but now you're like, oh, the Ristic Study is a card that some people might not enjoy playing against, or there's a strong card, there's an official list that has this there. maybe I shouldn't put it in this deck or something along those lines.
Yep.
I also, like when you're building bracket 3 decks, I've also enjoyed a bit of the menu of like, ooh, okay, I got to pick 3 cards off this list. Which 3 do I want this time around? And there's some fun to be had there as well.
Yeah.
Also, I think you brought up, which is good, is even though there are 40 cards on the list, your deck's going to be 2 colors, 3 colors. So
Right.
it really helps narrow down the number of cards you have to look at really fast. Okay, I'm white, green, and blue. Well, I got to look at the white, green, and blue ones, but I don't have to worry about the red and black ones.
Yeah, I actually found, going into this, I thought it was I'd have to be referring the list back and forth a bunch. But once I got going, it was actually fairly intuitive. Yeah.
I was talking with one of the folks over at EDH as we were running through this list, and I ran through the system. And then the next time we had a call, he just showed me a stack of ancient tombs he had pulled out of his decks. Right? I won't name names. Maybe I'll let him talk about it on social if he wants to. But I thought it was just really funny. He's like, all I ought to do is take ancient tomb out of all these decks, and that these decks were already playing at a pretty fair level. This one card was just kind of accelerating them a little bit extra. So let's pull that out of there.
Yep.
I thought that was interesting.
All right.
Question time.
Let's go through questions.
Yeah, so
there are
many
a
of them.
lot of them. I'm going to get through as many as we can. If your question does not get answered here, the Discord is a great spot. That's probably going to be your best spot. There are going to be dedicated channels for all of this discussion. So you can head there after the stream. And then, of course, social media is your second best bet. Probably.
And the article has about 15 questions I thought would be popular in it at the end as well. So we'll probably get to a lot of them here, but
that'll be on dailymtg.com.
But if we don't,
all right.
the article.
Okay,
right, let's do it.
I've seen a couple of questions about the Game Changers lists and Commander, so I'll make this a twofer. One, was there a separate Game Changers list? Was it ever considered to have a separate Game Changers list for Commanders? And two, do Commanders count against your total number of Game Changers?
Yeah, great example. I talked about this in the article, so you can if you're watching this video on a VOD, you can go read the article too. But the answer is twofold. One, we did talk about having a separate list for Commanders, if we wanted to do that at all. But one of the big things with this system we wanted to be careful about was complexity. There's already it's a new thing you're learning for the first time. There's already a ton going on here. There's 5 brackets and this list of 40 cards, and we really pared it down super far from a lot of what we've talked about. And we wanted to try and reduce the number of lists that we had rolling around. Like, for example, at one point, I know we talked about a version, you saw it, where we had all the LD cards listed out, right? But there's just one more list you had to learn.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to get down to one list of truth. Now, it's not saying we couldn't do that. We talked about it. If that's what the community really wants, I'm happy to talk about, oh, these are the cards that are game changer commanders, right?
Yeah.
That seems more than reasonable. And once again, that's why your feedback is so important, right? We got it to a state where we were happy with it. Now we're showing it off to the public. We're going to get all kinds of feedback on it. I can imagine anywhere from there's a separate list for commanders to no commanders are on the list, right? Because once again, as I said earlier, commanders are the one thing everyone kind of opts into, right? You know before the game starts what someone's commander is. So if you don't want to play against Turgid, you can be like, hey, Blake, can you please not play your Turgid deck? Because I know you want to. No.
I don't even have a Turgid.
No. You do other nefarious things, I'm sure.
I do.
So that's the answer to that question. As far as if they count toward your game changers, yes, they count toward one of your 3 game changers.
Yeah, if Urz is your commander, that is one of your game changers.
Right. And once again, that's what we wrote in for now. Maybe we'll end up with something different when the system gets fully rolled out, but we're totally open to opinions on that. It just made the most sense to keep it consistent to me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, I think this is going to be a common question, especially for you red and green players out there. If I build an optimized deck without any game changers, is my deck a 3 or a 4?
Yeah. So ultimately, it is a little on you to decide where you should go there, right? There's some amount of judgment that happens here. For example, you can build a deck that is technically bracket 2, but is actually very strong, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping you from being able to do that. I think a lot of typal decks would fall into that category where you build the strongest goblins deck you can imagine, maybe minus like Ancient Tomb or something, and it could be 2.
My elves deck, if I take Gaia's Cradle out, it's a 2. Yeah.
Exactly. There is some amount of judgment that happens. These are guidelines that put you in the right direction. However, with that said, a lot of the game changers are there because they're cards folks don't want to play against, right? Like, there are many people out there who are just like, I do not want to play against Rhystic Study one more time, right? I don't want to play against Jin Kataxis Core Augur. So even if you get it a little bit wrong, those cards not being in there will still help the games a little bit. But you're always allowed to opt up brackets, is kind of how we phrased it. You just can't opt down brackets, right? So if you're playing 5 game changers, you can't pretend and say your deck is a 2. But if you build a deck that is technically a 2, technically a core deck, but you know it's a 4, then you can play it out of 4, right? So you can kind of oscillate up and down a little bit there.
Yep.
But really, by building your deck, you should kind of get a rough idea of where it fits, I think.
You touched on this a little bit before, but it's worth reiterating. So the question it written in chat, and was there any discussion of putting some of the recently banned cards on the Game Changers list?
Yeah, so we don't want to change anything with the ban list right now, but our goal is, as I mentioned before, to come back at the end of April with a rollout of the full system that at that point will take some number of banned cards likely and put them on the Game Changers list. We really like it as that half-step tool. It just didn't make sense for us to unban cards from Commander at the same time we were rolling out the beta of this system, because we wanted to see if the system works, right? And what data we get from it, and what we learn from it before making any changes at that level. I do predict that, provided that things go on the trajectory that we're hoping for, there will be multiple cards unbanned in April and come onto that Game Changers list. Because there's many cards on the list that are totally fine and even fun at higher powered Commander, but cause challenges at lower power, lower bracket Commander. We don't want to do that when we're rolling out the beta of it. It's a little too early, but I think you can expect that in April. So if what we're waiting for is unbans, come back at the end of April, and I'm really excited about the Game Changers list as a tool. This is this amazing tool that is like some cards will stay on the ban list. Power 9 cards, Mox Jet, that's not going to come off the ban list. There's some cards, like I mentioned earlier, Coalition Victory, which are super safe at the highest levels of Commander. And then there's a lot of stuff in between. So we're going to have to talk and iterate on it, but I love the Game Changers list as a tool for being able to pull those cards down so that folks who want to play with them at a higher power can, but the folks at the lower brackets don't have to worry about them as much.
Yeah, and I think you keep talking about it as a tool, and I think that's really important because it was a tool that hasn't been available. It was either banned or not before, and so having this tool, I do think, lets you add some of those corner case ones.
Well, one of the things I mentioned at the top of the stream was terminology was really big for us here. Right? We wanted to create just more terminology to use. And you and your play group may not even use all of this, right? Like one thing that is really good, easy shorthand is how many Game Changers are in your deck. And you're like, oh, your deck has 12, my deck has 2. Well, maybe we're not going to be a good match against each other. So there's a lot of just things you can talk about now that have never existed before, right? It's basically been, the terminology has been ban list, CEDH, and rule 0 are like the 3 pieces of Commander terminology that have really existed. Now we're giving you a lot of additional terminology you can use to help find the games you want to find in whatever fashion works the best for you.
Yeah. All right. There are only 2 red cards on this restriction list. Is mono red the weakest color by virtue of having the least busted cards? Well, maybe you can talk more about like color balance on this list.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, right, something you're not seeing just from the Game Changers list is, of course, when I talk about, say, no land destruction at the first 3 brackets, or no mass land destruction. Well, that's a lot of red and white cards that happen to live there, right? There's a lot of Armageddons and Ravages of War and Wildfires and Runations and all that kind of stuff that is not on the Game Changers list, but you already probably weren't playing anyway, but we've now finally codified a little bit. But yeah, when you look at a lot of cards in Magic, it just broke down that blue and black are very strong colors in Magic and have been for a long time. There's a lot of older cards especially that aren't always the most fun to play against, a lot of efficient tutors and so on. With that said, it wasn't that we sought out to be like, okay, well, green and white are going to get away with it, and red's going to go with it, and blue and black's going to get a lot. It's kind of where we landed based on the cards we talked about, and I really cannot stress how many cards we talked about. We talked about so many cards, and I want to give a big shout out to the panel. We talked about so many cards, everyone suggested cards, we voted on tons of cards, we went through a lot of cycles of this. And this is where we ended up. But there's a lot of cards in those colors that we could talk about. Like, when it comes to green cards, the Great Henge is a card that was discussed plenty, right? Is that list worthy or not? One thing that really was important to consider too is, one, we wanted to keep the list small. We didn't want to have, we talked about some versions that were like 100 cards. But that's so much to learn and care about. We wanted to keep it a little smaller. 2, provided that this works, we're going to be unbanning cards in April. So we wanted to save and putting them on the Game Changers list. So we wanted to save some room for those cards potentially. And also just when something was close, kind of on the edge, we often veered toward like, well, maybe we should leave it off, but because we can always put it back on later if we want to. So those are some of the heuristics we used. And the last one is, how much does it warp the game, right? Rhystic Study, Smothering Tithe, someone plays that, it really warps the game. Demonic Tutor does not warp the game itself, but we'll always go find the game warping card. So a lot of these are cards which really warp the game around them. And Great Henge is really strong, but does it warp the game around it necessarily? Well, you can debate that perhaps, but there's room for those cards to be added. And that's why your feedback, once again, super helpful. Please, please. I cannot wait to watch all the videos and podcasts and social media posts and people talking about what should be on the list and not on the list. I'm excited about it.
So, question about bracket 3. We mentioned, no 2-card infinite combos until the late game. What constitutes the late game?
Yeah, I mean, usually I'd say turn 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there. Some of this is a little on feel, right? Like mass land destruction for me is a great example. If I show you Armageddon, you're like, yeah, that's mass land destruction. If I show you Winter Orb, that's clearly mass land denial. If I show you Fall of the Thran, which destroys all lands and then brings them back 2 turns later, is that mass land denial? Well, it is if you're going to sacrifice the Fall of the Thran, you know. So some of that, there is always a little bit of judgment that has to be exercised here. And when it comes to infinite combos or lockout combos and when they happen, there's a bit of the spirit of the bracket. And that's why in the article that comes out later today, there's a bit of a philosophy and description under each one of them. But generally, you know, if you're looking for like a rough heuristic, I would say turn 7, turn 8 at the earliest is when I want those to start showing up. So no Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation, but if you have, you know, if you're astral dragoning a Cursed Mirror or something like that on turn 8, that's a lot more reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, my Tuvasa deck, I think, is a really good example of this, where it has kind of both. I have like a number of Basalt Monolith combos where I'm generating infinite mana on turn 3 or 4, but then it also plays Doubling Season and like a couple Planeswalkers that are 4 or 5 mana, where, yeah, if you go Doubling Season turn 5 or 6, and then the Planeswalker next turn, that's kind of late game-ish, depending on what they do.
Yeah, so it's like I said, it's a little bit by feel, and we're all going to be learning here as we try this out, right? But I look forward to learning a lot and hearing all of your feedback.
Yeah. This is a common question we got before, and we're going to get in chat. Was there ever discussion of something like Canadian Highlander, like a point system?
Yeah, so one of the things I mentioned is complexity, and there's already a lot going on here. Having points attached to all these cards that would need to be managed, that you would have to take into account when building your decks, and so on, and then figuring out, okay, is Rhystic Study the same point value? Like, what is the point value of Demonic Tutor versus Rhystic Study? All this stuff. There's a lot of knobs to turn there, and a lot of complexity that goes into that. And we really want to get down to one list of truth that you can pull cards off of at, you know, essentially 1 point apiece. If you think of it, it is Canadian Highlander in a way at the 3rd level, where every card is worth 1 point. So we did talk about it, we investigated it, but we ended up going with this more straightforward, simple system here. You know, we talked about things like, okay, you can have Armageddon, but it's 4 points, so you can't play it in the first 3 brackets and all that kind of stuff. But it just got complicated. The list got very long very quickly, and we wanted to really keep it to a smaller list of cards. So.
Yep, makes sense. All right, I'm seeing a number of questions about where can I go find this information all the time. So first of all, Gavin's article at the conclusion of the stream, although Stibbs, if you're watching, go ahead and put it up. dailymtg.com, look for the article by Gavin Verhey about Commander brackets. That's going to be your primary source for all of this information, plus questions, answers, thought process, all of that sort of stuff. You are also going to be able to find this information from your friendly Commander podcaster, YouTuber.
My channel will have a video on it shortly after this concludes.
Gavin will have a video. A lot of the people who are big Commander content creators are on the panel, and so we'll likely have videos and podcasts and articles and all of that stuff going up today. So you'll be able to find it in all those places. But yeah, source of truth, Gavin's article, dailymtg.com, and then information will be flowing freely at the end of this stream as well.
Yeah, I think Command Zone will have a podcast out. EDH actually has something later this week. I really, once again, it's a community-focused thing. I wanted to loop in a lot of the community members on what's happening here. The thing I'll say on that, too, is for the beta system, right, we have this one article. It's still a beta. Please go try it out. It's not in full bloom yet. If this, you know, in April, when we roll this thing out all the way, there will be other places besides a single article from me that you can go find it, right? I know we've talked about daily MTG redesigns for the Commander area and things along those lines. TBD how that's going to work out, but we want to make sure that it's not just, hey, there's one article from Gavin that's referenced for the next 5 years. We'll have something a little more official than that you can go check out. But for the beta portion, there is this article you can go check out.
All right, continuing on with questions. All right, how does this list adapt to game warping effects with half a dozen versions available? The example they give, so let's say we're in a hypothetical world where we decide Doubling Season is a game changer. But what about Parallel Lives, Adrix and Nev, Anointed Procession? So, you know, when you look at the whole of Magic, we have a bunch of different Moxes. They're not all on this list. So how do you all think about effects that are near to each other?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of good granularity there. I'll even use the list as a great example, right? So you've got a number of tutors on the list: Demonic Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Vampire Tutor, Imperial Seal. All incredibly powerful cards. They can find you anything or some of the strongest cards in Commander really easily. However, Enlightened Tutor, Worldly Tutor, not on the list, right? because those find a much more narrow subset of things, and aren't finding some of the cards that, like, Demonic Tutor finds anything, Worldly Tutor finds a creature, which is a bit of a different story. So there is a bit of a gradation there.
Yep.
Mox is another great example, right? Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond, almost any commander deck can take good advantage of, can be used for fast mana. We talked about Mox Opal and Mox Amber, but Mox Opal is just for the for artifact decks, so it requires a bit of a deck building restriction.
Yep.
Mox Amber is best with cheaper commanders. So we kind of drew some lines around where some of that stuff is. The article gets into this a little bit more, but there were some heuristics that we drew up around that. So in the case of Doubling Season, if we decided for Doubling Season to go on this list, which I don't predict, but could certainly happen, then we would talk about Parallel Light and Anointed Procession, all these cards, and see, okay, well, is the issue with Doubling Season that it impacts Planeswalkers? Is the issue with Doubling Season that it's just too catch-all? And maybe some of them go on there and some of them don't. But I think your Doubling Seasons are probably safe. We'll see. Don't quote me on that. We'll see.
Next question. I'm surprised to see some Infinite Enablers not on this list, like Food Chain or Basalt Monolith. Is there a reason that many of these cards are control pieces and tutors rather than the tutor targets and payoffs themselves?
Yeah, so we talked about no infinite combos or game-ending combos like that at brackets 1 and 2. Bracket 3 is where you can start seeing some late game ones. So hopefully that boxes out a lot of that stuff right there. Food Chain is a card that we certainly talked about. It is a card that is mostly used for nefarious purposes. Basalt Monolith is a bit of a different story to me, where yes, you can throw some cards in the air and end up with a Basalt Monolith infinite combo, but plenty of folks also just use it as like, I'm accelerating my mana. So we want to be careful about how much splash damage was caused. And once again, we wanted to keep the list to a manageable level. So hopefully that no infinite combos thing helps out there a little bit, but happy to make revisions in the future. I'm open to all kinds of feedback on this.
Here's an interesting question that I had while I was looking through some of my decks as well. What about play patterns that take many game actions and extends a person's turn for long periods of time? What tier does that go in?
Yeah, well, it of course depends on the example, and there's a bit of user judgment in here, right? Extra turns, we don't want you looping at brackets 1 through 3 because they kind of function like combo decks. They take up all of someone's time, etc. If you built, I'll take an old modern deck. If you built Elf Ball with Glimpse of Nature and a bunch of elves, and you're going to be taking 20-minute turns, or a Storm combo deck that's taking 20-minute turns or whatever,
yeah,
that's not necessarily best practice at the lower brackets, but it's not something we're going to call out on its own. And often, frankly, I'd say if you're taking a 20-minute turn, your deck is probably pretty darn strong. So it would probably fall into a bracket 3, 4, 5 situation. There is a bit of judgment you have to exercise on your own. We tried to give you, some guidelines here that you can kind of guide yourself with, I suppose. But ultimately, there is a bit of self-judgment that will have to happen of understanding where you think that goes. And it'll take some play to kind of figure out where that hits. But if your deck's taking 20-minute combo turns, it's probably not a bracket 1 or 2 deck, is my guess.
Yep. So you've talked about precons are generally in 2, but here's a good question. What about the future of precons? Are these new precons going to follow this bracketing? Will they ever have cards that are on the Game Changer list?
Wow, you stole a question from my article right out of my own mouth, I guess. So it's a phenomenal question. First of all, just to set the stage, we've changed nothing about design because this is a brand new system. We worked far ahead. We want to see how this is all received, opinions from people, et cetera. If we started building around a Game Changers list now or that list changed in the future, that'd be kind of silly. But I'll use an example of, there are some cards that have shown up in precons recently. Jessica's Will, for example, is a great example of one on the Game Changers list that's shown up in precons. And I want to say a couple things. First is that we're talking, bracket 2, core, is the average modern day precon.
Yeah.
We can deviate from that to some degree if we want to include a Jessica's Will in there in the same way that sometimes I'm sure people come to the table and be like, hey, here's my 1 rule 0 exception. That's the thing we could theoretically do. We kind of want to see what the reaction to this is first, right? And how people take it. But there's all kinds of other commander decks that are made, right? There's Secret Lair commander decks that have cards like this. There's going to be no shortage of ways to get these reprints out there. And on the honestly pretty positive and exciting side, I could even imagine a world where, imagine that this is adopted pretty widely, several years from now, we're actually able to release, imagine you pick up a precon, and on the back of the packaging it tells you what brackets it's in, right?
Sure.
Imagine a set comes out and it's like, hey, this time we've got bracket 1, silly theme precons, have a lot of fun. Oh, this time we've got bracket 3 precons for you. These are souped up and really strong decks. I can imagine that world. I'm not saying we're doing that or working on it or anything like that. We're going to see how this is all received and what cards end up on it, what the reaction is. But we could take it into account in design. The flip side of that I want to mention, I covered this in my article too, is does the Game Changers list mean that we're going to create cards intentionally to put them on the Game Changers list? And the answer to that, I want to be very clear, is no. We are not using this as an excuse to like, oh, now we can make really strong commander cards and put them on this list.
You guys did that all on your own before.
Yeah, we've made all those cards and put them on the list of our own peril. We're not trying to do that here. This is not an excuse to go and make more and more powerful Magic cards. Will more cards end up on this list over time? Yes, of that I feel confident, but we're not seeking out to go and do that. It's not like we're like, oh, well, green only has a couple of them, so we should really try and make some more. That's not the goal here. So.
All right. How do you anticipate this affecting brand new players? For example, they picked up some packs in a pre-con. They happen to pull a card that's on the list. Are they now expected to know that they're in a higher bracket?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is this is really cool for matchmaking. It's really useful at events like MagicCons, going to your local game store, et cetera. There is stuff to learn here. There absolutely is stuff to learn. And the same way that a new player doesn't know a number of things, this is one thing that they'll have to learn about. I've met new players that put Gristlebrand in their deck, and they just had no idea that Gristlebrand wasn't a legal card. As always, there's guidance from other players, people talking about things. Make sure there's good communication about the system. But as it's used more and more and gets more ingrained with people, and people become used to talking about it, I think that will help out a good deal. And then finally, what I said at the very top of the daily MTG or weekly MTG today is that you don't have to use this. This is a way to help make sure that your games are match made if you're going to an event where you don't know everybody. But if your friends, your play group kind of all know what's going on, that's totally great. And you're happy playing, that's wonderful. So if you're new and you've got a pre-con on some packs and you and your buddies are playing with a pre-con on a few packs, it's all good. Your decks are probably going to be totally fine against one another. And if you go into a game store and you play a Demonic Tutor that you played, I would hope someone is just like, hey, did you know about this thing called the Game Changers list? And it's a cool educational moment, right? It's not a tournament. You're not going to get disqualified from your game of Commander, right? I hope that it's a good discussion point, educational moment.
Now with that attitude, you're not. All right. How does a repeatable tutor like Birthing Pod count for brackets 1 and 2?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. So like Survival of the Fittest is on the Game Changers list as an example of a card that repeatedly tutors. You'll note that it says few tutors or sparse tutors is what I say in the article. So you should not be playing tons and tons of tutors in your deck. But if you want to include a Birthing Pod, that's okay, right? One of the reasons why we didn't make specific rules around play this many of tutors or no tutors or things like that is because often some really inefficient tutors to find the card that you built your deck around or something can be fun, right? Diabolic Tutor, a 4-mana to go find anything card, is a far cry from Demonic Tutor.
Yeah. And
a Birthing Pod, even if you get to tutor several times over, is a far cry from a Demonic Tutor or a Vampire Tutor or something like that. So a little bit of tutoring can be fun. A lot of tutoring and playing the most efficient tutors is where you tend to end up with this really homogenous game. So if you want to include a Birthing Pod in your deck, that's great. Just try and not include 5 other tutors. If you're
and also, I think it's a good, looking at the rest of the texture of the list, Birthing Pod's a great example of, did you build a Phyrexian deck? Are you doing Phyrexian things? And Birthing Pod is in there because of that. It might just be 2. Are you tutoring up untap effects to keep a Birthing Pod chain going? That's probably pushing 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I love Birthing Pods, so
I do too.
You do have my heart.
Let's see. Okay. If the space in the Game Changers list was something you were concerned about and the number of tutors shows up in brackets 2 and 1, why also include them in the Game Changers list? So we kind of talked about this when I asked about Vampiric, Demonic. Was there any thought to just saying like tutors and then leaving and then making up room for other cards on the list?
Yeah, it was talked about. We wanted to really classify some of the biggest ones here, right? Demonic, Mystical, Vampiric, Imperial, some of the most strongest efficient ones, put them on this list because often these are the cards that you're like, okay, I'm playing it because it's super efficient, I should always put this in my deck, as opposed to Fabricate or something like that, where you're not just being like, oh, every deck should have Fabricate, where every black deck should probably have Demonic Tutor if you're building it in the best possible way you can. With that said, it's something I thought about, something the group thought about, totally not opposed to doing that in the future and pulling those cards off. Right?
Yeah.
One thing, the counter argument to what I said is there's a lot of folks out there that just love Demonic Tutor. It's a beloved card. They love finding their land or whatever with it, right?
Yeah.
So I could very easily imagine that coming off. That is all great feedback and exactly why this is a beta test, right?
Yep.
We're going to hear your feedback, iterate on it. And I could have totally imagined a world where in April we come back and we say, yep, tutors are just their own thing. They're off the list. These other cards are on the list. And we move on, right? So all your feedback like that is critical. It's really funny actually hearing even the notes just from this chat. I'm excited to go read social media later.
Yeah.
Because so many of these conversations are conversations that we have had or we have thought about over the past couple of months as we've talked about this. And it's like, okay, you're having the same thoughts, you're having the same conversations, you're having the same discussion that we're having. It means that we are mirrored here in a lot of how we've thought. It's time for us to stop having that discussion among 16 people and start having it with the world.
Yep.
And now we get to do that.
Exactly. You mentioned demonic tutoring for a land, so let's stay on that topic. Asking about land ramp and fetches. Are those considered tutors?
Oh, no.
Rampant growth.
The article says besides finding lands, right? So if you want to rampant growth, if you want to explosive vegetation, all that stuff is fair game. So.
What about something like crop rotation?
Crop rotation, yeah, I would call that still within the spirit of finding lands for the most part. Note that Gaia's Cradle and is on the game changers list, so it's a little harder to go find that. But
anything that you're crop rotating for would probably be on the game changers list.
Yeah,
most of the time.
Potentially, but yeah, the article has a description of what I mean by mass land denial, or sorry, by tutoring. Finding lands is within the spirit of that. Maybe that has to get tweaked up a little bit, but the other thing too, as we're working on this, there's a lot of cards in Magic, and if we tried to accommodate for every single edge case, it would be so burdensome. There'd be so many rules. So there is going to be stuff like, oh, you said I can find lands with my tutors. What about another card that's brought up is like Traverse the Ulvenwald, right? Which is a single mana to go find a land. But if you have Delirium, it can go find anything, right? Well, how do you want to quantify that as? Which once again is kind of why with tutors, it's like a bit of your own judgment of few tutors, don't use a lot of it. It's a bit on you there. So crop rotation, I would say, yeah, that's a fine thing to do in the first couple brackets. But the cards you find might impact where you sit.
All right. Again, for people who are looking for the article, if it's not up already, it will be up at 11 o'clock in 9 minutes on dailymtg.com. So that'll be the spot to find it if it's not up already. All right, so I'm just going to list some individual cards that people are calling out. Like, why isn't this on this list? I don't think you're going to speak to every one of them, but maybe you have some thoughts.
Let's do quick hits.
We'll do quick hits. Mox Opal, various other Moxes. Primeval Titan coming off the banned list. Time Twister not being on the Game Changer list.
All right, I'll talk about those ones to start.
Okay.
So the Moxes, I talked about this earlier in the stream, but Mox Opal and Mox Amber require more of a deck building restriction. They're not going every deck. They are strong. We talked about them, but ultimately decided to leave them off the list as a matter of granularity. The other thing about fast mana is it tends to compound. Once you have a little bit of fast mana, it becomes a lot better to play more fast mana, so you can cast your big things even quicker. So some of it is about granularity. I could see those cards going on there, but Mox Opal and Mox Amber are also quite different levels to me, right? Mox Opal is like an artifact deck, it's bananas. Mox Amber is like, well, on turn 4, I'd probably get an extra mana, is a lot safer. Primeval Titan is certainly a card that is a potential to come off of the ban list when we do our revisions. I'm not going to say if it is or isn't, because we don't know yet. But it is certainly one that we could consider. But as mentioned earlier, we did not want to do any ban list updates at this time. Rolling out a beta test system with a ban list update could create all kinds of challenges. And there was a fourth card you said. It was.
Time Twister and then also Wheel of Fortune, somebody mentioned.
Those cards were on earlier versions. We ended up taking them off in the end. They could go back there. But those cards are efficient, for sure. But there's 5 mana wheels in both. There's Time Reversal exists at 5 mana. Other wheels
draw 7s basically.
Right. A lot of those other ones are okay. These are just the most efficient ones there. So they're not even necessarily that big of a problem in and of themselves. When you start pairing them with cards like Nekusar or Migrum or whatever, that's where you start running into some more frustrations. But that's more about pairing cards together than the efficiency rates of these two specific cards. So we left them off for now. Maybe they come on, but once again, we want to try and keep the list smaller rather than larger, just because there's already plenty of cards at intake, and a lot of them are chunkable, but it's still a lot to see all at once. So we tend to err on the side of not putting cards on as opposed to putting them on.
Good question about another land destruction question. Where does Annihilator sit in that category?
So the line we draw in the article is usually 4 or more lands per player. So Annihilator would not follow. Like Stone Rain is fine. I don't know why you are Stone Raining in Commander, but if you choose to put Stone Rain in your deck, that it's not very strong. I wouldn't do that. But that's fine. Annihilator 2 or whatever, totally okay. To whatever extent Annihilator 2 is okay with your play group, So
Yeah.
yeah.
This is addressed in the article, but again, the article may not be up yet. So, but why isn't Soul Ring on the Game Changers list?
Ooh, yeah. This is in the article. It absolutely is, Blake. Soul Ring, by all categories and definitions, does fit the Game Changer, and the reason why it's not on the list is because it's Soul Ring. It is a card that is so ubiquitous with Commander. It is beloved by so many people. A little bit of fast mana every now and then can be okay. It is handed down from Sheldon Menery himself that this should be in Commander, and we really wanted to stick true to that, right? So Soul Ring is kind of the one thing that's like, yep, we're just gonna let that one exist, let everyone have it. It is the crystalline card, and then everything else is up for debate. But Soul Ring is, I think, too critical to Commander's identity and really part of its initial vision.
Yep. Were overall deck strategies considered in the brackets? It seems like Voltron decks are favored within lower brackets, while Control is more favored in high. Whether or not that's true, the question is kind of, did you think about different archetypes in different brackets?
Yep. We totally talked about archetypes. For example, should we quantify a bunch of stacks as a whole category of things and how that should play out, or how, Voltron or type-focused decks should play out, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, you can build a very strong Goblins or Elves deck without using many of these cards.
Yeah.
We talked about it. Ultimately, like I said, there is some amount of judgment you have to make, right? You can always notch yourself up higher in brackets if you want to. So if your Voltron deck is incredibly powerful, then maybe you should be playing at a higher level higher than 2. I'll give a great example, which is, Rachel Weeks has a Dragon's Approach deck, and she's like, well, this fits the description of bracket 2, but it's not a bracket 2 deck.
Yeah.
It's more of a bracket 3 deck, and so we worked on the system a lot to make sure you could nudge up a little bit as you felt was appropriate for your decks. You just couldn't nudge down, right? So you can't go play in 2 if your deck's full of Game Changers. But if you want to nudge up because you feel it deserves to be at a higher level, you are welcome to. And with your Voltron decks, if it is a fully souped up deck, once again, the names of the bracket should be indicators, right? Upgraded and optimized. If it is a fully upgraded or fully optimized Voltron deck, you should probably be playing it at a higher level than a pre-con level, right?
Yeah.
So once again, in the article, which should be up in 5 minutes if it's not already, there is a description for each of these brackets that has a bit of philosophy in there that I think will really help with those guides, right? What you saw today on the screen was a lot more of the technical stuff, but the philosophy of it I think will really help you figure out where those things go.
Yep. All right, so you talked a bit about why you wanted to lead with just the brackets, no bans, unbans. You want to keep this simple, get the tests out there. But I'll ask you a question about an update on a thing. Any news about the Silver Border list talk that the group was working on?
Yeah. So the information on the Silver Border list has been passed over to me and the group. So it's something that will certainly be talked about at some point or another. Given that we talked about this at the end of last year when all this was happening, and there's like MagicCons coming up and other events, we wanted to make sure that we could work on refining this and get this out to you all. But the Silver Border project is not off the radar. It is a thing that we will focus on at some point, absolutely. It's just not the current thing that we're talking about now. So.
We are almost out of time. Let's see. What's a good question to end on? Well, I'll ask this one. Because it speaks to varying power levels and what cards do. Ad nauseum made it into the Game Changers list. How come Necro didn't, even though they function pretty similarly?
Well, there's a big difference between paying life and having a card continually lose life. For example, Angel's Grace, infinite combos with one of them and doesn't combo with the other. Necro is a very strong card, certainly. You don't have to convince me of how strong Necropotence is. But it's not as much of a 2-card combo card as Ad Nauseam kind of is, right? There's plenty of CDH decks that win with an Ad Nauseam combo of some kind. You can, Ad Nauseam, Angel's Grace, Thassa's Oracle, all that kind of stuff. So that's where that one ended up. Necro is certainly a card we talked about. I would guess, I can't see the chat, but I would guess for 90+% of the cards in chat, we talked about them, and they were a thing that was discussed. So if you have strong opinions, we're going to be looking over all the feedback over the next few weeks. So please send us your thoughts, post it to us on social media, post it in the official Magic Discord, because I am sure, like we are all sure, the group, we all like the direction of the Game Changers list.
Yep.
We're also all sure that the list is not perfect.
Yep.
So we are happy to take your feedback in and iterate on it some. So I'm looking forward to seeing what folks think should be on there and what shouldn't.
Yeah. All right. That is our time for today, but it is not the end of this discussion. This is going to be ongoing for a while. If you want to continue discussing this, our Discord, the official Magic Discord, is a great place to do this. We're going to have dedicated rooms to talk about various parts of all of this. Gavin may stop by at some point in time to chat with you all. Our community managers will certainly be in there. That's a great place to focus feedback right now. Also, just speaking out on social media. You could tag Gavin, you can tag Wizards Magic, you can tag me. It'll all end up in the same place.
Other format panel members, too.
Other format panel members, I'm sure will be asking. They will be posting things. Look for videos, podcasts, articles. There's going to be tons of conversation about this, especially today and going on through the rest of this week. And then we hope to see you in MagicCon Chicago. I'm going to be there. Gavin's going to be there. A lot of people are going to be there trying out this new bracket system, formulating thoughts. And as Gavin said, we will be back in late April with an update. And if there are going to be unbans, that is the point where we would do them. And we will share that date as we get a little bit closer. You see?
Yeah, and one thing I'll say too that I'm excited about with MagicCon Chicago, I didn't say this earlier, this is like one of my favorite things, is there's always a discussion about like what should you pack for a MagicCon.
Yeah.
And I really love the idea, and a bunch of us have talked about this already, of like you fill up your bag with a bracket 1, a bracket 2, a bracket 3, and a bracket 4, or whatever. So when you sit down, hey, what do you want to play? You have a deck ready to go for it, which I'm really excited about. So anyway, something to think about if you're coming to MagicCon and how you want to pack for it.
Yep. So it is 11 o'clock, so the article by Gavin Verhey should be up on dailymtg.com now or very soon. So thank you for tuning in today. Next week, we are going to be back with Gavin again, as well as Zakeel Gordon, and they are going to be talking Final Fantasy.
Oh, I'm so excited.
That's going to be another big show. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.